Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning. Let us now begin our discussion of Mahesh Dattani's plays. Mahesh Dattani is one of our major playwrights who wrote his plays entirely in English. A lot of his plays, he's known for many of his important plays, especially Final Solutions, Dance Like a Man, Bravely Fought the Queen, On a Muggy Night in Mumbai, Tara, 30 Days in September, and so on, where many of which have to do with urban life. And they revolve around certain questions of gender and sexuality and certain institutional sites of power that regulate gender and sexuality, especially the family, religion, and society at large. He was born in Bangalore to Gujarati parents, and he went to St. Joseph's School in Bangalore. He was also a graduate in history, economics, and political science, and he went on to pursue a career initially in marketing and advertising management. He also worked as a journalist until he settled down to become a full-time theatre professional. So he is now known to be one of our major actors, directors, playwrights, and writers. Let us first begin with a very important play that he wrote called A Final Solution. Dattani earlier has also acknowledged the impact that a very important theatre figure called Alec Padamsee had on his plays. He was one of those major practitioners of theatre who appreciated his plays and also put up his plays under his own directorship. The other important figure was, of course, Mahesh Elkanjwar, whom Dattani considered to be the father of modern Indian theatre. And Dattani, in the preface to his collection of plays, also acknowledges the fact that he is the privilege of writing in English, the fact that he belongs to a middle class family and he wrote in English, and he realizes the privileges, the international attention that he has derived as a result of his socioeconomic position. He has also met with a lot of hostility, with a lot of challenges from society at large on the fact that perhaps some people charge him with the fact that his plays do not reflect working class lives, that they're largely mostly about middle class lives in cities. But then he also defends his position by saying that creativity cannot be limited by one's or cannot be identified or reduced to one's class position. That one should have the right to be able to reflect the realities of his own socioeconomic background and his own time and place. And so in The Final Solutions, which is a reflection of communal violence and hostility in the country, you have a very interesting chorus, an anonymous chorus that acts in the play, that performs in the play. They wear two kinds of masks. They wear either Hindu masks or Muslim masks, or both at once, to, in some sense, give the audience a sense of the communal violence, the climate of communal violence in the country. So it's an interesting backdrop to a play which is really about the riots and the curfew that follows on a night in the play, which is triggered by one of the characters in the play. So you have two intersecting narratives in the play. which in some sense suggest the fact that communal prejudice, the kinds of prejudices that, let's say, Hindus have against Muslims, has not changed, right, over decades. Right? And one of the ways in which the play does it is through the character of Hardika, who is interchangeable with the character named Daksha. And what is also very interesting about Dattani's plays is that his stagecraft is rather elaborate.
कुत्ते घूम रहे हैं।
तस्नीम कह रही है किसी ने मुस्लिम गर्ल्स हॉस्टल पे बम फेंका।
अरे बम फटा भी, आग लग गई, बिल्डिंग गिर गई, कुछ हुआ क्या? तुम्हारी दोस्त ज्यादा ही डर गई।
प्लीज बाहर बंद दिखा दिएगा, वो हमें मार डालेंगे।
पुलिस बुलाओ।
कौन हो तुम लोग?
निकालो बाहर, मार डालेंगे सालों को। क्या चाहते हैं ये लोग? अरे हमें मार डालना चाहते हैं, इतना भी नहीं समझते आप?
इन्होंने जरूर कुछ किया होगा।
नहीं, हमने कुछ नहीं किया, हमारा यकीन करें।
तुम लोग यहीं थे जब ये सब शुरू हुआ, दंगा?
निकालो बाहर।
झूठ मत बोलो।
तुम कहने क्या चाहती हो?
ये उनके भाड़े का टट्टू है।
किनका?
उन्हीं पार्टियों का। वो इससे और इसके जैसे लोगों को बुलाते हैं दंगे शुरू कराने के लिए, पहला पत्थर फेंकने के लिए।
मुझे नहीं मालूम था जेल जाने के नाम पर तुम्हें इतनी हंसी आएगी।
आपको क्या लगता है मैं यहाँ तक कैसे पहुंचे? अरे उन्हीं की वैन में बैठकर। आप मुझे दंगाइयों के हवाले करेंगे? मैं तो खुद एक दंगाई हूँ। आप तो मुझे मेरे अपने आदमियों से बचा रहे हैं। दरअसल आपको मुझसे नफरत इसलिए नहीं क्योंकि मैं एक दंगाई हूँ। आपको मुझसे नफरत इसलिए क्योंकि मैंने आपकी पोल खोल दी। आप जितना लिबरल समझते हो ना अपने आप को, उतना हो नहीं।
तुम मुझे कितना भी नीचे दिखाने की कोशिश करो, ये बात झूठ नहीं हो सकती कि तुम दंगा फैलाने वाले लोगों में से हो। दंगाई हो तुम, नीच।
So if you look at, for example, the stagecraft of Final Solutions, they resemble the stagecraft of many of his other plays, where the stage is divided into multiple tiers or levels, each level corresponding or mapping onto a layer in the psyche, right, in the mind. So it's the stage, the layered kind of construction of the stage reflects the layers of the human psyche, right? So it maps onto the complexity, the complex porous boundaries between the conscious and the unconscious. The play was first performed in 1993 in Bangalore, and then subsequently performed at Tara Theatre in Bombay in 1993 again, and then it was also translated into Hindi and directed by Arvind Gaur in 1998. So if you look at the stage directions of the play, they're rather elaborate. So it says in the beginning of Act 1, it's a 3-act play. The stage is dominated by a horseshoe or crescent-shaped ramp with the ends sloping to stage level. Most of the action of the mob or the chorus takes place on the ramp. Ideally, the mob or chorus should remain on stage in a crouched or stylized position throughout the play. The mob chorus comprises 5 men and 10 masks on sticks. The masks are strewn all over the ramp. The player wears a mask by holding the stick in front of him. At more dynamic movements, he can use it as a weapon in a stylized fashion. There are 5 Hindu masks and 5 Muslim masks. The mob or chorus become the chorus when they wear either the Hindu or the Muslim masks. Right, so they place these masks on sticks in front of their faces. They don't actually wear them, but they seem to be wearing them, and this suggests also the fact that how does one actually don religious identity, right? It's the fact that one doesn't essentially a Muslim or a Hindu, but then one becomes a Hindu or Muslim through certain ideological violence that produces it. So but when referred to individually, they remain chorus 1, chorus 2, etc. The players of the mob or chorus do not belong to any religion and ideally should wear black. Right? So they are anonymous otherwise, they wear black, but then they take on these religious identities when and where required. Within the confines of the ramp is a structure suggesting the house of the Gandhis with just wooden blocks for furniture. However, upstage, perhaps on an elevation, is a detailed kitchen and a puja room. On another level is a room with a roll-top desk and an oil lamp converted to an electric one, suggesting that the period is the late 1940s. Right. So the upper layer, is suggestive of an earlier world from the 1940s, just before and after independence. This belongs to the young Daksha, who is in fact the grandmother, also sometimes seen as a girl of 15. Right. So the play constantly oscillates between the time when the grandmother was young, a young girl of 15, and to the time later on when she's an old woman. There are several instances when Hardika, the grandmother, and Daksha, the young bride, are on this level at the same time, although they are the same person. Hardika should be positioned and lit in such a way that the entire action of the play is seen through her eyes. When the play opens, Daksha is reading out what she has just written in her diary. Hardika is seated motionless on the same level. Right? So the entire play is through the perception of Hardika, the grandmother, who is looking back on her life as a young girl who had a Muslim, school friend, somebody who was a neighbor, somebody she grew up with, right? And so she has a Muslim childhood friend, and she's looking back on her life from her present position. So it may seem initially that not much has changed over the generations between her grandmother's time when she's grown old and the time when she was young, a young girl of 15, and 40 years later when she has turned old, right? So she is telling her secrets, her life, her past to the audience through her, by reading out her notes in the diary that she had maintained as a young girl. And even as she is reading out her diary, or even as there's a flashback of the young girl Daksha who is writing her notes in her diary, there are whispers and shouts of freedom from the mob and the chorus in the background. Right? And this continues throughout Daksha's speech, when she talks about how her father, Daksha's father, was a freedom fighter and who was very happy when the British left the country, but also had a deep hatred and resentment towards Muslims, and but is also glad that something called Pakistan was created where the Muslims could be sent away. And then she also loses her father during the freedom struggle, and she is convinced, or she's been told, that the Muslims are responsible for her father's death. Right? So she has a deep sense of prejudice, a deep-rooted sense of prejudice that she acquires as a young girl because she thinks her father has been killed by them. And she also has a deeply pious mother who worships Lord Krishna. And during a time when there were riots during independence, that she sees the idol of Lord Krishna in a house being destroyed by stones that are being thrown on the house, and so her house is being vandalized, and she sees the idol of Lord Krishna also being broken, and she wonders whether there's any power in the idol of Lord Krishna, or is it just a question of faith? Is it a question of blind faith? Right? Has she just placed a blind faith on an idol, or does the idol actually have or possess power? So she remembers losing an entire collection of records, of sound records, musical records of Shamshad Begum, Noor Jahan, Suraya, and so forth. So she regrets, she's remorseful at her loss, that she's lost an entire collection of records during the attack during independence. Then you have the mob of the chorus to the accompaniment of drum beats that are growing slowly. They wear Hindu masks, so they are behind the masks. They become more frenetic. The lines could be distributed and spoken individually or in groups. There's a definite counterpoint, right? So they wear Hindu masks and they take on the bloodthirsty, frenzied appearance of Hindu mobs who accuse Muslims of having destroyed the chariot, the rath of their lord, of the god, and of having stabbed a priest during a procession. Then chorus 4 and 5 continue to question why should they, why would they? It could have been an accident, while chorus 1 mutters no accident, no accident, and chorus 2 and 3 continue, the stone that hit our god was no accident, the knife that slit the pujari's stomach was no accident. Soon they overlap and say it together, right? So there's this constant reverberation of voices that on the one hand charge Muslims with having destroyed their chariot and for having destroyed their faith or challenged their faith, for having stabbed their priest. But then there's another chorus which wonders if it must have just been an innocent accident. Then there are other choruses that are violent and aggressively asking, demanding that Muslims be driven out of the country. So it becomes, the chorus gradually becomes an unruly mob that's crying out for blood. Then there is a shift to the living room of the Gandhis, Ramnik Gandhi and his family. And Ramnik Gandhi and his daughter pride themselves in their secular and liberal credentials. We get to know that Smita's friend Tasneem, a Muslim girl called Tasneem, the Muslim girls' hostel where she lived was bombed, right, during the riots. And Smita is concerned about her friend's welfare, and then she discovers, she learns that she and the other girls have been trapped inside the hostel, and the matron has called for the police, but no one has come to rescue them. They believe that it was a homemade soda bottle bomb that caused the destruction in the hostel. And then she tries to call Tasneem's parents in Jeevnagar to tell them to come and fetch her, but she's unable to get through on the phone. And then Ramnik is not sure whether, he's skeptical whether it was really a soda bottle bomb that destroyed the hostel, because they're unable to find any remains of the bomb. And so he suspects whether any particular person may have been paid or volunteered to actually create riots between Hindus and Muslims. He wonders if it's the contribution, the role of some mischief monger who has tried to create or trigger communal riots between the two communities. Then they try to inform Tasneem's father of the bomb blast, and that's what Ramnik does. He has a conversation with Mr. Noor Ahmad, who is Tasneem's father, and tries to tell him that her daughter is trapped in the hostel after the bomb blast, but then the phone gets disconnected. I think the father disconnects the phone. Then there's again a relay of choruses that are again demanding revenge for the chariot, the god's chariot that has been destroyed, or for the priest who has been stabbed. And then they want revenge, and then again it cuts back to the Hardika, the grandmother, who again has a memory of her childhood when there were two boys who were running away for their lives. She remembers two boys begging for their lives as they are being pursued with sticks and stones. And this memory of Hardika's resonates with another with what actually happens in the play when they meet two other important characters, Javed and Bobby. Javed is Smita's friend Tasneem's brother, and Bobby is engaged to be married to Tasneem. Then the other important character in the play is Ramnik's wife Aruna, who is an Orthodox Hindu woman who observes ritual rites of purity and pollution. She does seem to be a fairly casteist woman. She, like her mother-in-law's parents and in-laws, she also follows the same ritual rites of purity and pollution. She constantly bathes herself, she performs puja, and she is unwilling to entertain people who do not belong to her religion or caste in her house. Right? So these are two ends of the spectrum So you have in the middle you have Ramnik and his daughter Smita, who claim to be liberal Hindus, broad-minded liberal Hindus. On one end of the spectrum, you have a person like Aruna, who is an orthodox Hindu, who is casteist, who observes purity and pollution. And on the other hand, you have a character like Javed and Bobby, especially Javed, who later on identifies with Aruna in the fact that Javed is somebody who is, a young, aggressive, hot-minded, hot-blooded Muslim who wants to seek revenge against the Hindus for having persecuted his community. Right? So he's willing to take anything that it has, even if he's willing to inflict pain and suffering on the Hindu community. He is willing to commit acts of violence if to actually avenge the humiliation and the injustices that his community has suffered over the decades. So you can make out initially that Ramnik and Smita are tolerating Aruna's orthodox practices. Right? So they are just willing to humor her religious piety, that she always wants to bathe first, she wants to wash the idol, she wants her daughter to she wants to inculcate all these values in her daughter. And then you have another stage direction in the middle of it, as Smita is undressing the idol of Lord Krishna and putting him to bed. The chorus whispers, "We are neither idol makers nor idol breakers." Aruna folds the clothes neatly and puts them away along with the jewels. She picks up the Bhagavad Gita and reads out in an urgent whisper. Smita joins in. Aruna looks at Smita with affection. Right? So Aruna is happy that Smita is following all her instructions, that she wants Smita to actually inherit her religious piety. Then 174, 175, again there is Daksha's memory of her in-laws, who were extremely orthodox Hindus, who always bathed in the Ganga and constantly bathed themselves to purify themselves, especially when they saw a lower caste person or they were touched by someone else. They had to again go through the same bathing ritual. So she makes fun of her in-laws, but then she also ends up inculcating the same religious values. She also has a friend called Zareen, a Muslim friend whom she grows up with, and she is very fond of Zareen because she is her only access to a world outside the world of Hindu orthodoxy. So so she secretly visits Zareen before and after her marriage, only to listen to the records that she has of Noor Jahan and Suraya and some of her favorite early female playback singers. And she knows that she always wanted to be a singer, but she's forbidden from becoming a singer because she belongs to an orthodox Hindu family. But she secretly visits her friend Zareen to listen to these records. Then you have the entry of the two men, Bobby and Javed, who are apparently running away from a bloodthirsty mob that is chasing them with sticks and stones. And the mob believes or suspects that Javed and Bobby are responsible for creating the riots, for triggering the riots, and because they're loitering around during the curfew. And so they wonder if they are responsible for the riots. And so Bobby and Javed are trying to escape from the mob when they arrive at Ramnik's house, and Ramnik offers them refuge in his house. So again, pay attention to what the mob is doing during the action. So the mob or chorus circles around Javed and Bobby. There's a slow drum beat. Two of the mob or chorus suddenly grab them from behind and snatch the watch of one of the young men. The young men are petrified. Right? So they steal the watch of one of the men. The mob or chorus searches their pockets. Some money is found, which chorus one pockets. He's about to throw away their wallets when he sees something. He removes a bus ticket from Javed's wallet. Right? So Javed and Bobby tells lies to the mob, saying that they have just come from Jeevnagar. And the date is 22nd, and they came on the 22nd. Right? And then the chorus suspects something fishy. Then they also remove a handkerchief from Bobby, and then the handkerchief is actually knotted with something. And Bobby tells the mob that he wears the handkerchief only because it's too hot. So he needs something to protect his head from the summer heat. Then chorus 1 takes the cap and that he has fished out. He fishes out a prayer. Chorus 1 fishes out a prayer cap from Javed, and he covers Javed's face with it. Javed deliberately wears it on his head with dignity, whereas Bobby has removed his handkerchief. The mob or the chorus picks up the Hindu masks on a slow drum beat. Right, so Javed is identified as a Muslim, and he embraces that identification, his identity as a Muslim, by wearing the skull cap on his head with dignity, while Bobby has removed the handkerchief that was on his head. And then the mob turns to becoming a Hindu mob as they wear the Hindu masks. Right, and now the bloodthirsty Hindu chorus is out to kill the two men. The young men come to the door of Ramnik and they shout for help, right, asking Ramnik to save them. Initially, Ramnik and Aruna hesitate; they're not sure they should open it, and even Hardika or Daksha thinks that there are some Muslim men who have come to attack them, so they don't open it. And Hardika keeps telling Hardika or Daksha, they accuse Muslims of having killed her father, right? So she doesn't want these men to be let into the house. Now, two of the chorus have Muslim masks on. The Gandhis can simultaneously be seen in an animated discussion with the two men, right? So chorus 1 and 2 says, they hunt us down, they're afraid of us. This is the Muslim choruses. They hunt us down, they're afraid of us. They beat us up, we are few, but we are strong. They beat us up, they're afraid of us. They hunt us down, they want to throw us out. Then there's a cross cut, so there's a scene to the Gandhis, and the chorus quickly exchange the masks, and Bobby and Javed again beg the Ramniks to open the door because they're scared they'll be killed by the mob. Aruna asks demands that they call for the police, but then Ramnik wants to find out who they are, and then Ramnik discovers that the people who are outside are these two young Muslim men who are trying to escape from a bloodthirsty Hindu mob, and his liberalism will not allow him to not give them refuge. So he does open the door and they enter. So even the chorus accuses Ramnik of being a traitor for giving refuge to two Muslim men. But then Ramnik says that they've done no harm to anyone. There's no reason why I should not protect them. So he opens the door and they enter. And Hardika is reminded of one of the Muslim men she knew as a child when she sees Javed. Right? And so she thinks that Javed is the same person from her past who has come to attack them. So she's suspicious of Javed. She doesn't know if he is a sincere or genuine man. After they enter, Aruna, tries to be civilized to them, although she is very uncomfortable with the idea of having strangers, that two Muslims in her house. And then she offers them a glass of water and places it before the two men, despite the fact that she is very uncomfortable with the idea of sharing the same glasses with men who are Muslims. So Aruna goes to the matka and quickly pours out water into two glasses and places them very delicately in front of the two men. They both quickly gulp down the water. Obviously they were thirsty. Aruna's aghast. She was sure they wouldn't drink. Then later on, Aruna holds the glasses with her thumbs and index fingers on the sides which have not been touched by their lips. She takes them away and keeps them separate from the other glasses. So initially the Ramniks are told that Javed and Bobby have been running away from the mob during the curfew because they are in search of Tasneem. But later on, Smita realizes that Javed is lying because she seems to know a truth that the rest of the family does not. So initially she tells Ramnik and Smita tell Javed that they informed his father of the bomb blast at Tasneem's hostel. But then Javed tells them that he is estranged from his parents. He no longer talks to them, so he does not know of the conversation. And that's when Ramnik becomes suspicious. He wonders why Javed would come to see his sister when he is not living with his parents. And Smita tells them that Javed is actually secretly responsible for the triggering the riots. So Javed initially defends his position by saying that he's proud of being a Muslim because he does not differentiate or discriminate against other Muslims, unlike Hindus who practice untouchability and caste. Right? So they do not treat their lower caste Hindus, fellow Hindus, as equals. And so there's this very brief argument between Javed and Aruna. Aruna, who was trying to protect her own, Hindu values and purity, and Javed, who accuses people like Aruna, upper caste Hindus like Aruna, of not treating their fellow Hindus with love and refusing to give them equal status. But Ramnik offers refuge, and he tells Javed and Bobby to stay back at his house, spend the night with them. And here again, there is an argument. There's a kind of a brief comment on the benevolence and patronage that only Hindus can afford to offer to Muslims, because they belong to the majority community. They're the only ones who can afford peace. They're the only ones who can afford to offer protection to their persecuted Muslim citizens. Right? So again, this entire encounter between Javed and Bobby and Ramnik and Smita is constantly intersected and undercut by Hardika's memories of communal violence and her bigotry and prejudice against Muslims from her childhood during partition. Hardika says, "That night I could not sleep. I listened. I was angry that Ramnik was blinded by his ideals. Why did he offer that boy a job in our shop? What was he doing? How did he know they were innocent? Couldn't he see there was more violence in that boy's eyes than those stone throwers' threats? He wasn't just saving two boys from getting killed. This was something else Ramnik was trying to do." Right? So Ramnik offers a refuge to Javed and Bobby, and he also offers them a job in his shop, right? But clothes shop, and Hardika does not approve of it. And then Javed asks Ramnik, what does it feel to be a part of the majority? And Ramnik says, yes, I never thought about it. Javed, about feeling good because you are the majority. Do you feel good because you are the majority? Ramnik says, no, not about being the majority. Javed, but sir, it is in your every move. You must know, you can offer milk to us. You can have an angry mob outside your house. You can play the civilized host because you know you have peace hidden inside your armpit. So it's again a challenge to the limits of Ramnik's liberalism. Only someone who belongs to a majoritarian community, who has power, can afford to be kind, can afford to be compassionate, can afford to offer peace as though it were a commodity which can be bought and sold. Right? And then later on, Ramnik offers a job to Javed in a sari shop in Kapda Bazaar. But then Smita says that Javed is lying, right? That he should not be offered a job in the shop because he's lying. And she tells her father that he was thrown out of his house by his father. Right? Tasneem had told Smita that Javed was thrown out of his house by his father because Javed apparently has been hired by Hindu parties to create riots. So Smita says those parties, they hire him. That's how he makes a living. They bring him and many more to the city to create riots, to throw the first stone. So it's suggested here that no one would suspect a Muslim for triggering riots because they belong to a minority community. Why would they create riots? What do they have? They have everything to lose, right? Why would they create riots? And so initially Smita suspects that Javed has been paid by the Hindu parties to throw the first stone, to create riots in the community. That is the end of Act 2. In Act 3 again, you have a flashback to Daksha's life where she has been married at the age of 15. She has orthodox in-laws and she has an orthodox husband named Hari, and they own or they run their own mill and their own clothes store. And she wants to ask her in-laws to give Zareen's father, who's poor, who's jobless, who doesn't have a job, asks her father-in-law to give Zareen's father a job, right? But they refuse. They refuse to give him a job, and she does not know why. So we don't know initially what has happened. Later on, we get to know that Zareen's father, owned a shop that was burnt by, Hardika's in-laws in revenge during the partition, and then they offered to buy back the same burnt shop for a much lower rate. Right, so they destroy Zareen's father, and they destroy Zareen's father's shop, and they deprive him of his livelihood, his only source of income. And Hardika or Daksha is not aware of this at that point. Later, there's a crossfade again to the scene of the Gandhi's living room, and Javed tells Ramnik that he's paid thousands and lakhs for doing it, for triggering the riots. And so Ramnik obviously disapproves of Javed's violence, his greed, his corruption and his violence. But Javed is unrelenting, right? He's defensive, and he says that it's people like you, he tells Ramnik, who drive me to a corner and I have to turn to myself and my faith. I have a lot to thank you for. At least now I'm not ignorant of my history and faith, right? So he defends his faith, and he defends his entire community against the persecution of Hindus. But Ramnik does not approve of violence. He says, it is in you. How dare you blame your violence on other people? You have violence in your mind. Your life is based on violence. Your faith is based, and so on. But then he has to check himself, because he cannot accuse Islam of promoting violence, right? So the play really is about this struggle to distinguish personal relationships with people from ideological relationships with Muslims or Hindus that are based on hatred and violence, right? And so very often this distinction between personal relationships and ideological relationships cannot be sustained. It's a struggle to try and separate these two, to be able to, it becomes a test to one's own liberalism to be able to make and sustain a distinction between personal relationships with people and an ideological relationship with people based on their religious identities. So Javed says, you would have let the mob kill me. So Ramnik says, you cannot justify yourself for being a riot rouser, and Javed says, you would have let the mob kill me, and you wouldn't have minded if, pointing to Bobby, he had died as well. You don't hate me for what I do or who I am. You hate me because I showed you that you are not as liberal as you think you are. Right? So the point is, I have shown you the limits of your own liberalism. Not you don't hate me because of the fact that I'm Muslim or because I am a rabble rouser. I'm a riot rouser, somebody who triggered the riots. And in stark contrast to Javed is Bobby. Bobby is someone who does not identify with his community, right? So he tells Ramnik later on, Bobby's talking about Javed, says he has changed. Believe me, he has changed. I don't want to defend him. If I defend him, you will say, aha, we know why he is saying all that. Pathetic. At one time in school, he was the hero, smart and cocksure. You take his anger and attitude very seriously, don't you? Ramnik, should I not? Bobby, it's funny how you can be emotional and irrational and yet appear smart, intelligent and be taken seriously. Because you're convinced that you have all the answers and you urge people to accept your convictions. And they do. I always appeared stupid in front of Javed. He loved playing the hero with the neighborhood boys, and he was. A minor incident changed all that. There may have been others which Javed didn't talk about. I can't remember how it started. Oh yes, there was a cricket match. Not much of a match. We were playing cricket on our street with the younger boys. The postman delivered our neighbor's mail. He dropped one of the letters. He was in a hurry and asked Javed to hand the letter over to the owner. Javed took the letter and opened the gate. Immediately a voice boomed. What do you want? I can still remember Javed holding out the letter and mumbling something. his usual firmness vanishing in a second. "Leave it on the wall," the voice ordered. Javed backed away, really frightened. We all watched as the man came out with a cloth in his hand. He wiped the letter before picking it up. He then wiped the spot on the wall as the letter was lying on, and he wiped the gate. So that the person is obviously a very orthodox Hindu. He stared at him as he went back inside. The postman came out of the next house and grinned when he saw this. "Take no notice," he said. "This man is slightly cracked." We all heard a prayer bell ringing continuously. Not loud, but distinct. The neighbor had been praying for quite a while, but none of us had noticed the bell before. We had heard the bell so often every day of our lives that it didn't mean anything. It was a part of the sounds, the wind and the birds and the tongas. It didn't mean anything. The next day, the neighbor came out screaming on the streets, yelling at our windows. We peeped out. He was furious, tears running down his face. We couldn't understand a word he was saying. I found out later, someone had dropped pieces of meat and bones into his backyard. I didn't speak to Javed for many days after this. I was frightened of him. For months, whenever we played cricket and heard the bell, we remembered that incident and we avoided looking at Javed. So this suggests that Javed may have planted the meat and the bones in the house or in the backyard of a very orthodox and casteist Hindu and triggered some of the violence between the Hindus and Muslims. Later on, Bobby says, "I was ashamed of being myself." After this incident, he says, "I'm ashamed of being myself. I was apologetic for being who I was and pretending that I was not a part of my community, for thinking that I could become superior by not belonging. Nobody called me baboon in college. I chose to be called Bobby." Right? So he says that nobody can actually quite escape the structural inequalities and violence that characterizes the relationships between Hindus and Muslims. That despite the fact that he's Hindu, despite the fact that Bobby is a Muslim, he does not want to be identified as one. He thinks that he can be above his community by not identifying himself as a Muslim. This is something that is not possible, right? So he's ashamed of associating himself with someone like Javed. Later on, we discover that Javed has not been paid by the Hindu parties to create riots, but that he himself volunteered. Right? He volunteered himself to create riots. Right? And he tells Ramnik, who threatens to throw him to the mob. He tells Ramnik that I am no different from the mob. Right? I'm no different. Right? I'm a part of the mob. I'm no different from them. We both do the same thing. I'm someone who wants to seek revenge, who avenge the humiliations of the Muslim community by attacking Hindus. And the Hindus want to persecute Muslims because they think that this is a country only for Hindus. Right? So I do exactly what they do, but only on a different street. I was there on that street when the Rath Yatra came, and I did precisely that. I shouted. I had permission to do exactly what I had been asked not to do all my life. Raising my voice in protest, to shout and scream like a child on the giant wheel in a carnival. And then he tells, Javed goes on to tell Ramnik that he is disillusioned. He is deeply disillusioned. He has feelings of anger and frustration, but then now he feels alone. He hates himself for what he has done. Bobby would never come to the meetings that Javed was a part of, the Muslim gatherings that he was a part of. Bobby does not want to identify with a violent community. Javed seems isolated because he hates himself for what he has done. And then he later on tells Ramnik that anyone sitting at home, sipping tea and reading the newspapers will say that it is obvious that a minority would never start a riot. We are too afraid that it had to be politically motivated. Try telling it to 1,000 devotees swaying by their own religious fervor, united by their fantasies of persecution, constantly reassuring themselves that this is their land by taking out processions. So all the Muslims in some sense feel the need, they're provoked to feel the need to create a holy war, a jihad, right? Which they believe is justified by the fact that they are persecuted by Hindus, who in turn ironically think they are being persecuted by Muslims, despite the fact that they are the majoritarian community, that they occupy a huge place, a position of power in the country, and they want to rule their land on the country on religious lines. Later on, we discover Javed's participation in the riots during the chariot Rath Yatra, the chariot procession, and we learn that he nearly killed the pujari, but he does not. Somebody else ends up stabbing the pujari. Right? So he stops short of committing that act of murder, which he does not do. And there's a chorus again, a Muslim chorus in the background, lamenting the fact that they belong to a minority community, that they belong to a minority community, and that they do not know how to be embraced by the majoritarian community without losing their own identity. Right? So they're struggling to be accepted as part of the larger community. And later on, you have the other side of the spectrum, which is the exchange between Aruna and Smita. And again, Smita, being the liberal person that she is, tells Aruna that she always wanted to accept Aruna for all orthodoxy. She did everything that Aruna asked her to do, like reading the Bhagavad Gita, like cleaning the idol of Lord Krishna, and praying and fasting, only to satisfy her mother, right? Not because she had any kind of Hindu piety. Right, so it did not come out of her own piety, but only because she wanted to tolerate and accept her mother for whom she was. She tells her that it would have been very easy for her to join forces with her father and corner her mother for being the only Orthodox Hindu in the household, and she obviously she claims to have felt stifled by her mother's piety, right, intolerant piety. But then she also tells Aruna that she needs to learn to be more accepting of differences, of religious differences, of even differences in between religious piety and orthodoxy and secularism, right? So liberalism is somewhere in the middle, and you have these two extreme spectrums of religious violence, both Hindu and Muslim fundamentalism and violence on the one hand, and on the other you have Hindu orthodoxy and casteism, and there's this constant negotiation between these two extremes in the play. So and it's very interesting later on that Javed himself identifies himself with Aruna, right? He even tells Aruna that we are the same, right? That we are both in some sense not very different, right? You and me, we both feel pride. So if Aruna feels pride, a deep sense of pride at her own religious practices, her own religious values, Javed is proud of the fact that he is this Muslim rebel who wants to avenge the humiliations of his community by attacking the Hindus. And then later on, we also again, there's a flashback to Daksha and Daksha's in-laws, who are again unwilling to give Zareen's father a loan or a job. And later on, she discovers that it was Hari and her father-in-law who were willing to buy up the burnt-up shop, the shop that they burnt, for an amount much lesser than what Zareen's father had demanded. And she's later on punished for her friendship, for her illicit friendship with Zareen. Smita, towards the end of the play, tells her mother that one can always create freedom no matter where one is. Right? It's the freedom of thought. It's the freedom of acceptance. It's the freedom of tolerance, but also embracing difference. Right? And that is the freedom that she believes that one can have no matter who one is or where one is. And as a test of the faith of Aruna, as a way of the meeting of these two extremes of religious orthodoxy on one hand, the orthodoxy of the majoritarian community, and the kind of communal violence between Hindu and Muslims on the other, the persecution of a minority by the Hindus. You have a scene in the play towards the end of the third act where Bobby holds the idol of Krishna in his hand, much to the shock and horror of Aruna, who's terrified and cannot bear the fact that her god has been polluted by Bobby's touch. But then nothing really happens. Nothing happens, and it becomes a test of Aruna's faith, right? That faith does not lie in intolerance, in persecution, but in being absolutely secure and comfortable with one's own religious credentials, with one's own faith, without being excluding others, right? Without being intolerant and casteist, right? And so it comes with a certain degree of tolerance, which then preferably should then move on to a larger mode of acceptance and embracing. right? So and Hardika also is in some sense her own, she has to question her own prejudice when she discovers through Ramnik much later on that the family shop, that her family, her in-laws had actually burnt the shop and bought it from bought the shop from Zareen's father at half the price, right? So I think by the end of the play, the characters that are are driven by religious zealotry, by religious prejudice and bigotry, are in some sense forced to unlearn many of the values that they have inherited, right? Many of the stories that they have overheard and transmitted onto the next generation, right? So they, in some sense, it's a process of unlearning and relearning what it means to be tolerant, what it means to be accepting. The play itself tests the very limits of liberalism, the benevolence, the patronizing attitudes of the Hindus towards Muslims, and that becomes a way of challenging the limits of liberalism by negotiating these different ideological positions, and by also trying to distinguish ideological positions, ideological relationships from personal relationships with people, and not being prejudiced to someone simply because they are Muslim or Hindu, or because they have committed or not committed certain acts of violence. So that is Mahesh Rattani's play, Final Solutions. Thank you.